This is a Sony a6000. It is a relatively old camera by Sony, and it is absolutely incredible. It has completely blown my expectations out of the water, and I highly recommend it to anybody looking for a camera used under $300. Trying to find a camera at the right price point, especially if you're not making money with your camera and you're more of a hobbyist, but you don't want to just use your phone, you want to graduate to an actual camera, is kind of hard to find, right? Most of the cameras that people recommend online are anywhere from $800 to $8,000, right? It's really hard to find new cameras for a decent price that you think this will actually get the job done. That's where something like this comes in. If you're willing to shop used, you're willing to look at Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist if anybody actually still uses that anymore, or eBay, you can find this, the Sony a6000, for a bargain. And one of the reasons I recommend this camera to anybody who is looking for a cheap camera is, one, the image quality is just fantastic. We're going to talk more about that in a little minute. Two, I think the aesthetics of this camera are really cool. I think this has aged incredibly well, especially the silver one. I've got many expensive cameras that I get to use for professional photography and videography, and this one I got to use very briefly for a little bit of time, and I've absolutely loved it. And like I said, I found this camera on eBay. I got it for $220. The lens that I decided to use for the photography that we're going to be talking about in this video is this, and this is a Viltrox 23mm f1.4. The reason I went for a 23mm f1.4 is because on a Super 35 sensor, which this camera has, it gives it a roughly 35mm equivalent sort of field of view. So recently I had some opportunity to do some automotive photography. I've never really taken photos of cars before. It's something I wanted to try out. And I had the opportunity to take photos of a beautiful Corvette from the 90s. And I wanted to take out this camera and test it against this. This is a Sony a7 III. It's about $1,500 used. And I put a Sony Zeiss 35mm f1.4 on it, which is about a $1,500 lens, $1,000 to $1,500, which is actually the lens that you've been watching this video on. The reason I chose that is because on this camera I have a full frame 35mm equivalent, and on this camera I'm using 23mm, which is a 35mm equivalent. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you photos of these two cameras side by side. This camera and lens cost me about $300. This camera and lens cost me about $3,000, 10 times the price. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you photos. They're similar style photos between the two. They're not exactly the same, but they're pretty close. One costing $300, one costing $3,000. They're going to be labeled camera A and B, and I'm not going to tell you which one is which. And I want you to leave a comment down below guessing which one you think the cheap camera is or the expensive camera is. So you would write A, Sony a6000, or A, Sony a7 III, whichever one you think it might be. Now, I don't know about you, but I was incredibly impressed at how close this held up to this camera. Now, there are slight differences. There are sort of field of view slight differences by the way that full frame and Super 35 compress the image differently. But again, I'm actually not going to tell you which one of those cameras is the Sony a6000. I want you to leave the comment down below, and in my next video about the a6000 is when I'm going to reveal the answer, and hopefully a lot of you are going to get it wrong because I think that would be more entertaining. But I think they're incredibly close. I think both cameras did a fantastic job of capturing this. And to be fair, this is a pretty easy photography opportunity, right? We were taking photos at golden hour in a beautiful location of a beautiful car. So that makes it a whole lot easier to show off a good camera. So in this test, I tried to give them a fair fight. I didn't nerf this camera at all. I took the best photos that I could get on this camera, the highest quality images, edited to the way that I would like them, and I did the exact same thing with this camera. So obviously all the photos that you looked at, they're all edited. So I'm going to show you a few more photos here. These are photos specifically on the a6000. They're not part of the comparison that I was showing a second ago. And I think the detail in these photos, the colors and the editability of the colors is fantastic. I think the photos that came out of this are just fantastic. It's not the sharpest camera in the world. If you zoom in, 10 times, and really pixel peep, you will notice a difference. And the lens does have chromatic aberration. It's not the sharpest lens in the world. It's not the sharpest sensor in the world. So for example, all the photos of this, the ones that are actually going to the client, are actually like from the a7 III, because it's a full frame sensor. It's much sharper with Sony's Zeiss lens, and the detail is much better. So if you blow up those photos for like a much larger print, the Sony a7 III photos are going to hold up a lot better. But if you're just posting these on social media, if you're sticking it on Instagram or YouTube where there's tons of compression anyway, this is fantastic, absolutely incredible. A couple of downsides to this camera compared to a more expensive camera. The dynamic range isn't as good, but again, in these photos you can see it holds up really well. The screen quality is kind of low. The viewfinder isn't the best viewfinder I've ever tried. The battery life is really bad. It lasts about 30 to 40 minutes, but when I was taking photos of this car, I actually only had about 30 to 40 minutes with it, so you're very limited on time. I only use one battery, but if you're going out all day trying to do weddings or something with this, obviously you're going to want to take multiple batteries with you because it does die after about 30 or 40 minutes. Other than those issues, which honestly are not the end of the world, especially for the price that you can get this camera, I think it is an absolute bargain. $220 for a camera body that you can stick super expensive lenses on to get incredible footage or photos from, I think is a really good deal. This isn't my camera, this is a camera I got for one of my coworkers, and it's just been great. They're enjoying it, I got to enjoy it, and honestly, I think it's really hard to beat. If you're looking for a camera that is really cheap and you don't want to just use your phone, if you're like me, you just don't want to do phone photography, and if you have a limited budget, $200-300, this is the camera to go for. So again, I really want you to leave a comment below. I really want to see your answers to which one you think is the cheaper camera, and I'm so intrigued because honestly, like, I have to go back and look at the edit files to see which one is which, because they are very close. I'm incredibly impressed. Again, if you zoom in and pixel peep, of course you can see a difference, that's inevitable, but we're talking about YouTube, social media, and a cheap camera. I don't think that's necessarily, people aren't using this camera to print out things that are going on billboards. They're using it for Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, stuff like that. So if you're interested in this camera and you want to know a little bit more, I'd encourage you to maybe hit the subscribe button, because I'm going to maybe make 1 or 2 more videos talking about this camera, and in a post down the line I'm going to talk about which photos were which out of this camera, probably in about a week, because I'm going to be impressed if everybody gets it right. Let's just put it that way. So I'm going to try and get those videos out as soon as I can. I got a lot going on. I'm opening a coffee shop, as some of you know. I've got a full-time job, I've got a family, and I've got a YouTube channel to try and keep up with. So I'm pretty busy and I'm very tired, so I'm going to go to bed. I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.